Welcome to the AgManager Radio, brought to you by the Kansas State University Agricultural Economics Department. Our team of researchers and extension specialists are here to bring you commentary on the latest issues in agriculture.
Well, let me welcome you to another session of AgManager Radio. I am Vincent Amanor-Boadu, professor at Kansas State Department of Agricultural Economics. And with us today is Ms. Sara Wyant. Ms. Wyant is the president of Agri-Pulse Communications, a communications firm with offices in Washington, D.C., Sacramento, and Camdenton, Missouri. Sara is a veteran farm policy reporter who has reported on many of the pertinent issues facing farm policy today, from Capitol Hill to our farm communities. And Agri-Pulse is the industry's leading provider of farm and rural policy news. You may subscribe to Agri-Pulse newsletter on its website, www.agripulse.com. Welcome to AgManager Radio, Sara.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be with you, and always great to connect with everyone at Kansas State.
Thank you. The last time I think we connected was a few years ago when we had the unfortunate passing of our dear friend, Barry Flenchbar, and you were kind enough to step in to do one of the last classes he was going to do before he passed away. And I want to thank you publicly for that.
Well, thank you. He certainly has very big shoes for anyone to fill, to step into his classroom. And it was an honor to be asked. And he just had such a huge impact on my career and so many others that it was really, I think, a wonderful opportunity to honor him once again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Barry was great, and I owe a lot to my own career development here at Kansas State for him, because he invited me to come to Kansas and insisted that I come to Kansas, and it hasn't been, I don't regret one moment of it. Yeah. But let's begin today and talk about the upcoming elections and the future of our industry, the business of agriculture. And let me begin with the big thing. What has been happening with agriculture on the Hill the last few months?
Well, as you know, there's been a very concentrated interest in getting a new farm bill passed. We had an extension that expired at the end of September, and now there's a push again to see if there is a likelihood of getting something done in a lame duck session. But we really don't have that many legislative days left, and it's becoming much more complicated for a variety of factors. But let me just say this, that I think there's still interest. There's, especially as we look at the farm economy and heading into kind of a downturn, as we continue these cycles in agriculture. So that has added pressure. The hurricane damages that we've seen throughout the Southeast, our hearts go out to all the people who have been impacted, but I think that has also built some political pressure to do disaster relief. And so whether or not those two initiatives and pressure points can build enough to get a farm bill past the finish line in December remains to be seen. But with the election coming up, there won't be much action until they come back for a couple of weeks in November and then a couple of weeks in December. And keep in mind, they have to keep the federal government funded as well. So we've got major appropriations bills. We've got the Water Resources Development Act, WRDA, on the table. So there's a lot of work to be done in a short amount of time.
So let me just ask this rather, philosophical question. I mean, it seems like every time Farm Bill comes up, we get this, push it forward thing. What is in the way? Why can't we get this thing, as important as it is? Why do we have difficulty bringing it to a close?
Well, part of it is the politics side, and that we have very close margins in the House and in the Senate. And so to the extent that action needs to be taken in either chamber, there needs to be a substantial majority of Republicans in the House and Democrats in the Senate that are willing to move the ball forward, so to speak, on the Farm Bill. And I think there's desire on both sides, but the Republicans have advanced a bill out of committee, the House Ag Committee, but they haven't brought it to the floor yet, probably because they are not quite sure where they're going to get all the votes. And in fact, the Congressional Budget Office, which has scored the House Ag Committee bill, has created another hurdle in that they're about 33 billion short. And so for those folks that are fiscal hawks and are concerned about the federal deficit and debt, they're not so likely to go along with something that is not budget neutral. And in the Senate, there's concern about why they would bring anything up when it's not even sure they can get something passed in the House. And so in that case, Senator Debbie Stabenow has not released a full text of a bill that she should be working on as chairman of the Senate Ag Committee. So we know in theory what she supports and what she doesn't support. And some of the things she doesn't support are in the House Ag Committee bill. So we're just kind of at this standoff politically, with people on both sides wanting to do the right thing, but not wanting to take some of the political risks that would require. We are hearing that G.T. Thompson and Senator Stabenow, chairwoman of the Senate Ag Committee, have had some pretty tense discussions as of late. And I don't know if that's going to, again, move the ball forward, but I do think that if we're going to see one yet this year, it'll be in the lame duck after the elections.
Are you at liberty to discuss some of the things that Senator Stabenow is not in favor of that is in the draft coming out of the House?
Yeah, she's long been a champion of the feeding programs, primarily the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And she has long made clear that any reductions in that would not be acceptable to her. Now, the House Ag Committee staff has made it pretty clear that they're not suggesting cuts. They're just trying to limit any future increases. So this gets, a little bit into the inside baseball details, but they did not want to see an administration have the ability to make additional big increases in what is allowed. And so they curtailed that. And so that's kind of a non-starter for her right there. There's also differences on how the Inflation Reduction Act funds, which have really bolstered a lot of conservation programs, how those could be spent, whether or not they'd be continued in the baseline and how that would work. And so there's some different ways that each respective chamber is viewing what needs to be in a farm bill.
Excellent. Let's talk briefly then on, farm incomes and then the projected farm incomes and, how all these relate. For the second time in as many years, we've seen farm incomes come down from a high of 163 billion in 22 to about projected 116 this year. I mean, the implications of this for farm families is real, and for our rural communities is also very real. From your perspective, what are you hearing from the countryside? What are farmers and ranchers? How are they preparing for these projections for this year?
I think the uncertainty is really hitting home with a lot of farmers and ranchers. First of all, they don't know on the political side who's going to be in charge. They don't know really what the weather is going to bring. And when we see a big storm damage in the Southeast, like we've seen, when we see drought sort of coming back into many states. So there's the political uncertainty, there's the environmental uncertainty, and then, of course, there's some regulatory uncertainty about what's going to lie ahead on things like endangered species and topics like that. So I think folks are really pulling back. They're not going to perhaps be, buying a new tractor, and then that trickles down to a Deere is cutting back, and we're seeing the layoffs there. You're seeing major crop chemical companies lay folks off and trim their budgets. So it's this pulling back and trying to cut expenses wherever they can on the farm or the ranch is having an impact across the agribusiness sector as well. And I think that's going to continue to be the case until we can start to see some more certainty after the elections, and then looking at the global perspective. Is there an opportunity to start to increase trade again? Is there an opportunity to add more value in the United States that we can then export? And so once we start to see some more certainty, I think perhaps that might change, but for the foreseeable future, into 25, I think that folks are going to stay pretty buttoned up.
And that's the advice we are getting from our economist here, that it's all becomes cost management more than anything else, since that's the only circle of control that our farmers seem to have to manage this environment that we are walking into. So with that uncertainty at the center of our conversation, then let's talk about what you see about the outcome of the upcoming elections and the implications of that for the business of farming.
Yeah, well, I think that it's pretty clear that we're going to see a pretty tight election, and I'm doubtful that we're going to know the full outcome the day after the election, given all the different things that are going on. And even right now, there's people that probably can't get to voting and polling stations because of the disruptions that we've seen from the hurricanes. So I think a very, very tight election. I think that Vice President Harris, you've seen nationally starting to really turn around where we were from just a few months ago with President Biden at the top of the ticket. She's surged ahead a little bit of President Trump. But as we talked a little bit about the fact that it's hard to really tell from just the polls who's going to be president, because in 2016, when Trump was elected, most of the polls had Hillary Clinton ahead by 5 or 6 points, and that certainly wasn't the outcome. So I think it's still too early to tell on that front. But Vice President Harris has dramatically raised more money and is outspending former President Trump by a large amount, by billions. And so we've got just a few more weeks to go here, and then we'll see how all this plays out. In terms of what it means for agriculture, there hasn't been an interview that I know of that either Vice President Harris or former President Trump has done on agriculture. We know what Trump has done in the past, and we see a likelihood that he would continue in those veins in the future. And that could have some very big implications for agriculture. For example, he talked about maintaining current tariffs and then increasing those on some players. And sometimes there's retaliation against agriculture for that. In Trump's case, he paid out like $28 billion to cover those ramifications. So will we see that again? It's quite possible. Vice President Harris has been in an administration where they maintained many of those tariffs, and they have not been advocates of really big new trade deals. They've managed a lot of things on the sanitary and phytosanitary side and tried to break down some barriers into some new markets, but really there's been a very worker-centric trade policy, not so much let's cut a bunch of new trade deals, of which they need Congress to help on that as well. So trade is one area where there's, not a huge difference that you can see. Her vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, we did have him in a video when he was a member of Congress. It was a Meet the Lawmaker video that kind of spelled out his perspective on several things, and that's available on our website. But when he was governor, he kind of changed his tune on the regulatory front and wasn't as farmer friendly. So it's kind of hard to tell exactly where they would come out on certain things. I think the biggest difference between the two would probably be on the tax front. And this has big implications again for farm country. All the tax package cuts that Trump was able to get through Congress will expire in 2025. That was the expanded estate tax. That was the 199 deduction. That was, a long list of tax changes that were made. And he would like to continue those. Vice President Harris has made very clear that she would not raise any taxes on anyone making under $400,000. But beyond that, there would be plans to increase taxes. So that's a pretty clear difference on the tax front. And so it does, elections have consequences, Vincent. And so we're all watching closely to try to see exactly how we can look at the words and see what that might mean.
Right. No, and, the way that farm country has been responding to these is also telling on how things go. But I think you make a great point on the impact of the weather on elections this year, especially. But we've seen significant, weather events over the last few years. I mean, hurricanes in the east. We're getting chorizos going now across the Midwest, and high-speed winds sustained over long periods, wildfires in the West, and all that. And, that is making farm business extremely challenging all over the country. And it would have been nicer to hear these, the conversation about agriculture take more center stage, because, and I don't know if you share this opinion, but I think agriculture has to be elevated to the same level as defense as a national security industry.
Absolutely. We've been talking about this for quite some time, that for anyone who eats, agriculture ought to be right there at the top of their concerns, and especially being able to produce for our country in our country. One of the reasons why we're looking at this agricultural trade deficit increasing is not only the value of some of our major commodities going down, but the volume and value of our imports increasing. And it's not good for anyone in this country to be totally reliant on other countries for their everyday diets. So I would agree with you that food security should be right up there with national security. And I know a lot of people within the House and Senate Ag committees say that they understand it, but it would be great if we had a national acceptance of that from the very top of the president on down throughout the cabinet, not just USDA.
Right. What can we do to push that? Because I think that, when we come to defense and appropriations and stuff like that, it seems like we get everybody around because they see the national security issues there. What can agriculture do to elevate agriculture within our policy environment, like you said, from the president all the way down, so that it's not just USDA as the advocate, but even the Defense Department being an advocate for agriculture. I mean, if, given all that is going on around the world currently, from Europe to the Middle East and all that, if we are going to get, embroiled in these things, it's obvious that it's going to not be a small skirmishy things that we're doing, it's going to be a big one. And feeding our troops and making sure that all these logistics are in place become critical. So what can we do to elevate, that same sensibility that we have about defense and bring it to agriculture?
Yeah, I think it starts with great institutions like yours on the educational front, making sure that all the students, whether they're in ag classes or non-ag classes, have that basic understanding of where food comes from and how it's produced and the challenges that are confronted by farmers and ranchers every day. And then beyond that, making sure that we reach out to all of our politicians, not just those that are in ag districts, that we're talking to people in urban districts, and we're making those connections so that people have a better understanding. This is something that's a very small example, but this year in California, where we have launched a few years ago a Western edition of Agri-Pulse, we did a tomato challenge where we asked staffers in the California legislature if they'd like to join us in raising a tomato. And most of them were so excited they'd never planted a seed in their life. And we got some short early girl tomatoes, and we had a competition. And it was delightful to see what they learned, how they benefited from this, and just to get the feedback. And I think if we could do that in more locations where we talk to the people who are governing about what it takes to grow even one plant, I think we'd all be better off.
That's really innovative. I really like the idea. As I listen to you talk about it, I think we should just do it across our institution and get all our
Yeah, there's you'd be amazed. And the winner actually brought to our summit that we were holding, I brought the plant and brought 2 praying mantises that had taken up on the plant. Yeah, they were new residents for the plant, and he was so excited about the whole thing. It was great to see. It did my heart good.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And circling back to that, I mean, you pause to think about it, and I mean, if you look at the budget distribution of the Farm Bill, the bulk of it is urban.
Yes.
So I guess, doing things like you just talked about, educating people to fully understand that, you have all these other advocates against agriculture pushing that, the Farm Bill is supporting rich farmers and all that. And sometimes, we let that drown us out. But if you look at the way the bill is structured, the majority of the funds from the Farm Bill goes to urban communities. Did I read that wrong?
It goes to people who are less fortunate and need more of a handout, but you're right that it is more dollars go into urban centers because those are where the population
That's
is.
right.
But
that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are a lot of folks in rural areas that are also very dependent on federal assistance for food. And I don't think we should forget that, because whether they're older or whether they're, have big families and just can't quite make the cut, we have people in rural areas. I could drive 10 miles from town here in Camden, Missouri, and find people that send their kids to school, and that's where they get their nutrition. So that's very important to remember that it is rural. But one other thing I just want to add to what you're saying, the majority of the funding for the Farm Bill, which is now, over $1 trillion, it is for the nutrition programs. But if we didn't have that marriage between the food part and the farm part, we wouldn't get any bill, because there aren't enough representatives from core ag districts that would be able to pass a farm bill.
Right.
So you need this political marriage between the food and the farm sections of the bill in order to ever see one in the future.
Yeah. And I see that marriage as the foundation for elevating the national security component of agriculture, that it's not just for the rural farm producing communities, that we actually, and we already recognize that in this bill, we already are feeding the nation beyond just the communities or feeding, just people making money. We are protecting this country in a way that sometimes we don't talk about it in agriculture.
Well, maybe we should send out seed packets with some of those payments and see if we get people to plant some lettuce or something.
I love it. I just love that idea. Well, Sarah, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us on AgManager Radio today. And I look forward to having you back very soon.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been my pleasure.
Have a wonderful day.